Hi, we're looking at the Exodus. In fact, a bit of a background to the Exodus in our study. And I would like to look at some of what was happening in the Nile Delta area before the Exodus took place. It was basically called the Hyksos. And the Hyksos were a group of Semitics that came into the Nile Delta area um, of of the Egyptian reign and kind of dominated there. They moved into the area somewhere and they ruled for about 100 years, approximately 1650 to 1550 BC. They took control of Avaris during the 14th dynasty and they set up, moved down to Memphis, and then later they ruled until the 14th and the 15th, the 13th and the 14th dynasties of the pharaohs. Both the Egyptian Manetho historian and Josephus, the Jewish historian, writer, the Hyksos, about the Hyksos led by Salatus overran Egypt and became the founder of the 15th dynasty. So that's basically what we have here. We're going to be looking at this very, very briefly. Who were the Hyksos? The origin of the term Hyksos is derived from the ancient Egyptian phrase meaning the rulers of foreign lands. They're also referred to as the shepherd kings. We don't know the origins of the Hyksos. It's generally believed that originally it was believed that they were another power, another country, another nation that moved down and attacked Egypt and actually conquered the northern part of Egypt. Now that has been disproved fairly recently. And it appears as if what actually happened is that there were nomadic tribes that were forced into the land of northern Egypt. About 1700 to 1600 BC, large nomadic populations of Asia Minor started looking for new lands to settle. The predominant group, known as the Hittites, came from Turkey. They grew in power, moved southwards, um, and kind of threatened the people in that area. So if you take a look at a map on this one, let's have a look there very quickly at this setup. We can see that this was the area. So these people were the Hittites were kind of moving down from here. But we also know that from the Mesopotamia area, the Babylon area, there were also people moving across this way. And they started actually threatening the people in this area, moving them down. They were gradually forced to move down and they moved into this area. This is the area where they moved into, the Nile Delta area. Now called the Hyksos. Now, when we start dealing with the Hyksos, we need to know there's a huge amount of uncertainty. We actually don't really know what was going on there. We don't know how it happened. We don't know where things came from. We just don't know. It's simple as that. The area of that the Hyksos settled in was the whole area of the Nile, Eastern Nile Delta. The capital city was at a place called Avaris. We can see it over here, Avaris. But they moved down as far as Heliopolis. They moved into the area also of Memphis. We know they had places in Memphis. Basically, that is where they were. That is the area they kind of settled. We think that it is believed, generally speaking, that a famine forced these people down into those areas. And so there's similarities with the story of Joseph and his people coming along. In fact, part of the credence of the story of Joseph and his people coming over in a famine is that we know that's probably what happened with the Hyksos. We don't know how they controlled it. We don't know much about the ruler. We don't know much about that at all. Um, The military strength of the Hyksos contributed to their ability to expand the influence and reign in that area. They had horses, they had chariots. The Egyptians did not have chariots at that time. That's another reason why it is believed that it's possible that Joseph could have, in fact, been a courtier of a Hyksos king. It's not out of the equation because Joseph had chariots, and we know that the Egyptians did not have chariots at the time of Joseph, but the Hittites did, and the Hyksos did. And so it's possible that he would have been driving around in a chariot, been ridden around in a chariot. It's possible that he might have been a vizier of one of the Hyksos kings. They overpowered the Egyptian population in the area of the Hyksos as they grew. All these people started moving in, the population grew. They became a political and a military and economic powerhouse. We know that Manetho tells us that the Hyksos in the Nile Delta killed many Egyptians. They reduced wives and children of Egyptians to slavery. Manetho tells us that they set Egyptian cities on fire, demolished Egyptian temples of gods. That's actually possibly unlikely. There's no evidence that they destroyed buildings. Equally, they seem to have adopted a lot of the Egyptian gods and mannerisms and customs. So why would they then have destroyed their temples? So that seems a bit unlikely. They made a man called Salati, their king, who strategically placed garrisons in the most suitable locations. If you look at some of them, those garrisons were around here in the area of against the Egyptian border, where they bordered with the Egyptian powers. We know they set up garrisons here to protect themselves from basically from this area, from these tribes over here. So we know that too. This is another thing of the Jews or the Hyksos, the Nile Delta area. When we look at this map, and here's another map of it, this is the Hyksos. When we look at it, we need to realize that the coastline, and we're going to pick this up in a later study when we look at where did the Exodus actually take place, the parting of the sea take place. But the coastline at that time was substantially different to what it is now. It was higher. So when we look at this map, we know that this came out there. So there could be cities over here that we have not discovered yet. So this is the area where they kind of, Varus later became Ramesses. Despite the increased power and stronghold that Salitas had created in the regions in the south of the area they occupied, they created other cities. They didn't manage to expand further than that for some reason or another. But Elephantine, Thebes, Abydos all acknowledged the power of the conquerors of the Nile Delta and paid them tributes, even though they remained to a certain degree independent of the foreign rulers. These giant cities all further down the Nile, down this area of the Nile. There was only one dynasty for the Hyksos. They ruled for 100 odd years. Salati was followed by Bion, Epiphanes, Apophis, Janus, and Assus. According to Manetho, these 6 kings reigned 190 years and roughly 10 months. So the Hyksos adopted Egyptian style of dress, the language, the art, the writing, the architecture. Indicative was the title that the Hyksos ruler had. He was called Sakuha, adopted from Horus, the possessor of Wadjet and Nekhbet diadems, who subdues and bows people. Wadjet and Nekhbet were ancient Egyptian gods referred to as the two ladies. Nekhbet was the vulture god and protector of Upper Egypt. Wadjet was the snake goddess and the protector of Lower Egypt, as shown in the picture of the eye that you see on these things at times. and in movies sometimes. By adopting the title Sacred Heart, was claiming dominion over Upper and Lower Egypt, which they never had at any point of time. The Hyksos ruler Kayan adopted the royal name Chiserini, meaning the one whom Ra has caused to be strong, and therefore aligned himself to the sun god Ra. Now it's because of this synthesis of Egyptian religion that I personally do not believe they destroyed Egyptian temples. Makes no sense. The Hyksos rulers were actually very well connected in the Eastern Mediterranean world, and they established trade agreements, diplomatic relations with Cyprus, Crete, Canaan. We know that the Hyksos king Kion established diplomatic relations with the Hittite Empire. We know that. We know that the diplomatic and trade tied with other Mediterranean areas, cities, and population politically and economically strengthened the Hyksos rulers. All the temples, all the sculptures that they had were in the style of Egyptians. The foreign kings erected their statues at Tanis, which were sculptured by Egyptian artists according to the rules of Egyptian art. The only difference is their beards and their crowns. We will look at that later when we look at the PowerPoint presentation. The Hyksos introduced 3 innovations to Egypt: the horse and chariot, farming equipment used for irrigation called the shaduf or akashaduf, and ships that incorporated a keel, which made them stable and seaworthy, more stable and seaworthy than the boats that the Egyptians had. And so trade with the Mediterranean increased significantly and boosted the economy of the Hyksos. We don't know how hostilities between the Hyksos and the Theban 17th dynasty developed, but it appears to have come to some sort of climax during the reign of the Theban king, the pharaoh Sennacherib. His mummy, which they've discovered, shows that he was killed by blows of an axe and a sword and a spear to the head. Apparently, according to some, in the Battle of the Hyksos. We don't know how those hostilities started, but much later in a fragmentary New Kingdom tale, the quarrel of Apophis and Sukenes blames the Hyksos ruler Apophis for initiating a conflict by demanding that the pharaoh Ptah remove a pool of hippopotamuses, which were sacred creatures, from near Thebes. We don't know how true this is, but we know there was conflict. That can be an apocryphalic kind of story. 3 years later, in 1542, Ptah's successor Kamosi initiated a campaign against several cities loyal to the Hyksos. And the account of this is preserved in 3 monumental stelas set up at Karnak. The first of 3, the Carnarvon tablet, includes a complaint by Kamosi about the divided and occupied state of Egypt. He says, "To what effect do I perceive it, my might, while a ruler is in Avaris and another in Cush? I sit joined with the Asiatic and Nubian, each man having his own portion of this Egypt, sharing the land with me. There is no passing him as far as Memphis, the watered Egypt. He has possession of Hermopolis, and no man can rest, being deprived by the Levites of Situ. I shall engage in battle with him, I shall slit his body, for my intention is to save Egypt, striking the Asiatics." And he recounts the destruction of the city at Nefertiti as well as several other cities that were loyal to Hyksos. In the second stele, Kamosi claims to have captured Avaris, but returned to his Thebes after capturing a messenger between Pepi and the king of Kush. And he died soon after Kamosi. Ahmosi, his son, continued the war against the Hyksos. Now if you watch the video, the first of the videos, we had the BBC presentation on the Golden Empire. This deals with this period of time. The reason why it is important to us is because this could have been the pharaoh who has ordered the killing of the Hebrew baby boys just before Moses was born. This could be the man. That's why we want to watch it, because the watching of those videos gives us good background into what was actually happening in Egypt at the time of the birth of Moses and up to the time of the Exodus. Knowledge of Ahmosi's campaigns against the Hyksos come from the tomb of Ahmosi's son, of Ebenah, who gives a first-hand account of how Ahmosi sacked Avaris. There was fighting Egypt to the south of this town, Avaris, and I carried off a man as a living captive. I went down into the water. He was captured on the city side and crossed the water carrying him. The Avaris was despoiled, and I brought my spoil from there. Thomas Schneider places the conquest in year 18 of Ahmosi's reign. Excavations that tell the Arba Avaris show no widespread destruction of the city. In fact, it seems as if it was simply abandoned by the Hyksos. And archaeology tells us that. Hanetu, as recorded by Josephus, states that the Hyksos were allowed to leave after concluding a treaty. Moses invested the walls of Avaris, they write, with an army of 480,000 men. I think that's unlikely. And endeavored to reduce the Hyksos to submission by siege. Despairing of achieving his objects, he concluded a treaty under which the Hyksos were all to evacuate Egypt and go whither they would be unmolested. Upon these terms, no fewer than 240,000 households with their possessions left Egypt and traversed the desert to Syria. Sounds a little bit like the Exodus, eh? Now, although Manetho indicates the Hyksos population was expelled to the Levant, there's no archaeological evidence for this. And Manfred Bittig, now a renowned archaeologist, argues on the basis of archaeological finds throughout Egypt that it is probable that the numerous people who were settled in Avaris were settled in other locations of Egypt as artisans and craftsmen. Now that seems more likely to me. Many have remained at Avaris as pottery and scarabs were typical Hyksos forms that were produced, continue to be produced for 100 odd years afterwards in the Nile Delta area. We know Canaan cults also continue to be worshipped at Avaris. So, following the capture of Avaris, Ahmosi, son of Ebenah, records that Ahmosi also captured Sharihin, which was possibly Tel El-Aljul, which some scholars argue was a city under Hyksos rule. There's no great certainty about that at this stage. But they were defeated and spread throughout Egypt. That is the reign of the Hyksos. Let's look at some other issues here. This is the Avaris, the archaeological excavation area of Avaris. There's a canal that flows here. At one stage, the tributary of the Nile that Avaris was actually on. That tributary must probably flowed something like that. We're going to see it a little bit later. But these are the areas that have been excavated at Tel El-Dalva. Here is a plan of it. Here is the highway. Here you can see where they call it the Pelezic Nile branch flowed around like that. They built a harbour in this area as well later on. Here's another picture indicating where that thing fell and where present Avaris is, with that canal going across like that. This is interesting. This is a blue stellate of the Hyksos ruler, Stitite scarab in a gold mount of the Hyksos ruler Khan. It's funny, the scarab is a beetle, and it was a sacred beetle, and the pharaohs used it as a seal. This is the scarab in a gold mount with the emblem, the Kotish of Hyksos ruler Khan. But getting to the crowns. Here A was the crown, the basket crown of Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt had this crown. When it was taken over, when the Hyksos were overtaken and conquered, they combined the crown to form that. These are other crowns that they used. At Avaris, they discovered numerous pottery items. They think that these strange shaped pottery jars were shaped like that. They're rather large, so that they could be put in the bottom of ships. In the keel of ships, to keep them stable, they used to put sand, and they used to put these in the sand, insert them into the sand so they wouldn't fall over. They also had different burial techniques to the Egyptians. They weren't laid out. Egyptian mummies, we found that they were all lying on their back with their hands, legs straight out, their feet together, their hands together, crossed on their chests. Here they were buried in a fetal position, and buried also, the Hyksos, buried also with clay jars. We don't know if there's anything in there. We said earlier that the Hyksos also adopted many Egyptian practices and customs. You can see that here. The Sphinx type statue of the pharaohs was also adopted by the Hyksos. They had mirrors. They had swords. Some more of those strange shaped jars that they had, and they had scarabs and that kind of thing. But one of the interesting, they also had a whole lot of jewelry. This is Hyksos jewelry that has been actually uncovered. The chains with it have been uncovered in that area. And here we can see some of their signet type rings of different rulers. Interesting thing about the Hyksos is that they found a whole lot of severed hands there, thousands of severed hands. And it is thought that at that time, when the Hyksos went into battle, to prove how many people they had killed, they would sever a hand of the person and bring it back as evidence to be paid upon. And the last image is a bit of a gruesome one, but here we can see the mummified head of Pharaoh Teo, who was killed in battle with the Hyksos. And you can see the damage done to his head. You can see it all here, where he was actually hit. Probably an axe, probably a spear, also probably an arrow, certainly something blunt over there, something blunt there. That is the Hyksos. We are going to look in our next study at a bit of the history of the pharaohs. I would like to recommend that there are 3 videos that I'm giving you links to, or you can watch it on here online in any case. But I will give you a link if you want to watch it on TV. But it's about the history of this period. It's the history of the period from the end of the Hyksos rule to the end of Ramesses' rule. Now, we spoke about 2 dates for the Exodus, a late and an early date. The one date would have started probably soon after Moses would have Moses born, soon after the Hyksos had been defeated. The second date would have him born soon, either early on in the life of Ramesses II, or perhaps a few years earlier, in which case he would have been born under Tutankhamun. Now, these videos deal with the time period in that. Why they're important, as I said earlier, that one of the reasons why these videos are important, because this was the environment that Moses grew up in. We are told that he grew up in the court of Pharaoh. Well, if he did grow up in the court of Pharaoh, if it was the earlier date, he would have grown up living with some of the pharaohs before they became pharaohs. He would have played with some of the pharaohs before they became pharaohs. It's possible that Hatshepsut could have been the one who found him. She was a queen, a princess of the pharaoh. She could have found him. She became a pharaoh. So what is important about these videos is not so much the history that they reveal to us, but they reveal to us the people, the pharaohs, under whom Moses probably grew up, in whose courts he grew up, the court in which he became bold and a strong personality. So it becomes very important for us to start looking at that, and very interesting, because you begin to discover some of the background of Moses' early years. And it explains to a certain degree some of his actions later, why he does what he does later, how he becomes the powerful leader that he was, how he could confront the pharaohs, because he probably grew up with them. So that's why I would really recommend you watch them. There are 3 videos. You'll pick them up on my next study, and I will give you the link as well. Thank you.